In the beginning, there was only the Ether and the Keepers. Among them were two beings who would later be known by many names. One would be known as Dr. Monty, the other as the Shadow Man. The Keepers eventually craft a device known as the Summoning Key that allows them to manipulate the original dimension, the Ether. They use the Summoning Key to create a perfect dimension called Agartha and master travel between dimensions. In their exploration of the new multiverse, some of the Keepers discover a dimension opposite to the Ether called the Dark Ether. They begin to experiment with the powers of this dimension, which in turn begins to corrupt their very souls. This creates a schism among the Keepers, causing them to form into two factions, the Corrupted and Uncorrupted Keepers. The Corrupted Keepers use the Dark Ether to create a device capable of absolute power called the Ether Pyramid. Shortly afterwards, a war breaks out in Agartha between the Corrupted and Uncorrupted Keepers. The war is costly for the Corrupted Keepers, and they soon know they will lose, prompting them to hide the Ether Pyramid on a moon within one of the newly discovered creations. That moon would be the moon of Earth. After they're defeated by the Uncorrupted Keepers, the Corrupted Keepers are banished to the Dark Ether beneath creation. The remaining Keepers take on the mantle of Guardians, swearing to protect the multiverse from corruption. Trapped in the Dark Ether, the Corrupted Keepers contort and evolve over eons, ultimately becoming the Apothicans. They desire above all else to return to Agartha. In 5 AD, knowing the planet has a gateway to Agartha, the Apothicans send meteors of an agent of corruption known as Element 115 to Earth from the Dark Ether. They believe humanity will one day use Element 115 to wage war amongst themselves, which would in turn open a rift that will allow the Apothicans to escape the Dark Ether. In 1292, the Apothicans' prediction comes true as they're released from the Dark Ether and begin to fight humanity. In 1294, a group of 4 heroes comes to the rescue of humanity. They would later become known as Primus. In 1299, after nearly 8 years of the Great War between the humans and the Apothicans, Primus and the Keepers restore order, saving humanity from the clutches of the Apothicans. After the war ends, Primus seemingly disappears from history. This Great War plays out exactly the same way in at least 2 parallel dimensions. These 2 dimensions split in 1300 due to the actions of Pablo Marinus. In Dimension 63, Pablo Marinus documents the events of the Great War, including what he has learned about Element 115, the Apothicans, and the Keepers. In northern France, a tomb is constructed to honor the fallen soldiers of the Great War. In the original dimension, nobody documents the events of the Great War and the tale is lost to history. In the original dimension, Element 115 isn't rediscovered by humans until 1931 near Breslau, Germany. German scientist Dr. Ludwig Maxis forms a new organization called Group 935 to study the element and use it to improve the human condition. He constructs the De Rees facility near Breslau, Germany. In 1936, scientist Dr. Edward Richthofen joins the group at the invitation of Maxis. The next year, in 1937, the Japanese discover deposits of Element 115 in the Pacific, prompting them to form their own version of Group 935 called Division 9. They construct the Rising Sun facility at the site of the meteor. Later that year, the US government discovers deposits of Element 115 at Groom Lake, Nevada, and begins research. No other group is able to match the genius of Group 935 in Germany when it comes to Element 115. In 1939, Richthofen and Maxis use Element 115 to research teleportation. Human test subjects are left catatonic and changed after being teleported. A few months later, Richthofen and Maxis resurrect one of the catatonic test subjects using Element 115. Thus, the first zombie is born. In late 1939, due to a lack of funding, Maxis turns to the Nazi Party for money. The Nazis express interest in using Group 935's teleportation research, the undead test subject, and the potential of creating wonder weapons using Element 115. In December, Richthofen and his fellow scientist Dr. Schuster successfully teleport a walnut, maintaining its chemical composition throughout the test. Maxis is unimpressed, revealing to Richthofen his plan to get funding from the Nazis. Richthofen worries this will cause massive defections as Group 935 is an international organization which has scientists from around the world. Richthofen and Schuster continue to research teleportation behind Maxis' back and against his orders. In January 1940, Richthofen and Schuster are ready for their first new human teleportation test. Richthofen is so confident in its success that he volunteers himself. Accidentally teleported to the moon, Richthofen encounters the ether pyramid hidden by the Apothicons. While inspecting the device, Richthofen is electrocuted and begins hearing the many voices of corruption, including that of the Shadow Man. These voices cause Richthofen to gradually lose his mind with an obsession to find Agartha. The pyramid then teleports him to Shangri-La, where he encounters an artifact known as the Focusing Stone. Afterwards, Richthofen returns to Germany, where he and Schuster begin to create a research station on the moon in secret from Maxis, using Maxis' alignment with the Nazis to recruit other disgruntled Group 935 scientists. The new group calls this research facility Griffin Station. Meanwhile, the Nazis help expand Group 935's influence beyond Germany. Group 935 takes control of the Rising Sun facility and works with Division 9. New facilities are created at the Wittenau Sanatorium, a repurposed theater in Berlin, the Tunguska River in Siberia, and the Austrian castle Der Eisendrache. In 1941, Russian soldier Nikolai Belinsky loses his wife in the German offensive on the Soviet Union. He turns to vodka to numb the pain of her loss. In early 1942, Griffin Station is completed. Richthofen leaves Groff and Schuster in charge, tasking them with uncovering the secrets of the Ether Pyramid. Richthofen returns to Earth to continue working with Maxis, while secretly plotting to overthrow him. In July, Schuster accidentally kills a rat near the Ether Pyramid, causing it to begin to charge the device. Groff and Schuster realize the device is powered by the souls of living things killed nearby. They report their findings to Richthofen, who begins sending soldiers and scientists to the moon to be sacrificed in order to charge the pyramid. In November, Japanese soldier Takeo Masaki is sent by Emperor Hirohito to oversee the operations at the Rising Sun facility. In January 1943, Nikolai is captured by the German army and sent to be experimented on by Group 935. In June, Takeo reports to the Emperor that the work at the Rising Sun facility is unacceptable. On the orders of the Emperor, Takeo is taken prisoner by Group 935 and Division 9. He's then used as a human test subject for their experiments. In June 1945, an Allied plane malfunctions over an airfield and crashes. German army trucks transporting the undead and Element 115 between Group 935 facilities are struck in the crash, causing a zombie outbreak. The Marines that survive the crash hold out against the undead as long as they can. These events are told in the map Nocturne Toten. Later that month, American OSS spy Peter McCain infiltrates Group 935. A few months later, the Americans suspect that Group 935 is losing control of their experiments and send a team of Marines led by Tank Dempsey to the asylum facility. Peter McCain escapes as an outbreak occurs. The Marines fight the zombies as long as they can during the events of Verrückt. Dempsey is captured by Group 935 and used for experiments alongside Nikolai and Takeo. Peter McCain receives orders to rendezvous at the Rising Sun facility. He ends up dying during his parachute down to the facility. On October 12th, Groff reports that the Ether Pyramid has been charged. This kickstarts Operation SHIELD, Richthofen's plan to kill Maxis and his young daughter Samantha, then enter the pyramid on the moon. On October 13th, Richthofen enacts his plan. Maxis does a teleportation test with Samantha's pregnant dog Fluffy, accidentally creating an undead dog, the first Hellhound. Samantha runs into the chamber to see her dog, causing Maxis to run in after her to stop her. Richthofen locks all three in the teleporter, teleporting them away. Samantha is teleported to the moon, where she runs into the Ether Pyramid, becoming corrupted by the Dark Ether and ruining Richthofen's plan. Meanwhile, Maxis is teleported to a cave called the Crazy Place, where he learns how to merge with electricity. Groff teleports Maxis to the moon to try and coax Samantha out of the pyramid. Once Samantha finally comes out of the pyramid, Maxis tells her to kill them all before committing suicide. Maxis then merges his soul with the computer system at Griffin Station as Samantha controls the zombies, creating zombie outbreaks to stop Richthofen. Realizing what's happened, Richthofen awakens the test subjects at Der Riese. Having lost their minds and memories due to Element 115 exposure, they agree to help him. Richthofen, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo would later become known as Ultimus. Ultimus travels to the Rising Sun facility to collect Richthofen's diary. Samantha unleashes zombies on the facility to thwart Richthofen. The events of Shinonuma occur and Ultimus escapes with Richthofen's diary. Returning to Der Riese, Richthofen plans to use the teleporters to travel directly to Griffin Station. The events of Der Riese occur as Sam unleashes more zombies. A Wunderwaffe DG2 shot overloads the teleporter, sending Ultimus forwards in time to 1963 at the theater facility. Richthofen ends up dropping his diary before they teleport. In 1963, the events of Kino der Toten occur as zombies follow Richtofen to the Kino facility. After Ultimus leaves for 1963, Group 935 is disbanded and the Americans and Soviets divide up its resources to further research Element 115. Among the artifacts the Soviets gain control of is Richtofen's diary. The Americans experiment with Element 115 at the Pentagon, while the Soviets experiment with Element 115 at the Cosmodrome. In 1955, Gersh and Yuri Zavoisky joined the Soviet research team called the Ascension Group. In 1962, Gersh and Yuri begin working on the Gersh device codenamed Project Mercury. On October 28, 1963, Primus escapes Kino der Toten on a lunar lander and flies to the Cosmodrome. The next day, Yuri is removed from Project Mercury much to his anger. He ends up reading Richtofen's diary, which causes him to hear Samantha's voice. Samantha gradually drives Yuri insane, telling him to complete work on the Gersh device. He complies. On November 5th, driven by Samantha's voice, Yuri tricks Gersh into activating the completed Gersh device. The rift created absorbs him and allows Samantha to travel through. Yuri is also absorbed and transported to the Pentagon. The next day, Ultimus arrives at the Cosmodrome and the events of Ascension take place as Ultimus frees Gersh from the Casimir mechanism while fighting off the zombie outbreak triggered by Samantha's arrival. Richtofen finds and reads his diary, causing him to remember that he needs to travel to the Siberian facility and collect the Vril device before completing his grand scheme. Gersh sends Ultimus through a rift in time to their next destination and begins to travel the multiverse. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, the events of the Map 5 take place. John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon, and Robert McNamara meet with Fidel Castro in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Due to the events at the Cosmodrome, a zombie outbreak occurs. Samantha sends Yuri to the Pentagon to thwart their survival. After Gersh is freed and Ultimus departs from the Cosmodrome, the outbreak ends at the Pentagon. All four survive. In an effort to avoid another zombie outbreak, the US government creates the Broken Arrow program. In 1979, Russ Mann begins working at Broken Arrow. In 2011, Ultimus is teleported to the Siberian facility by Gersh. They find themselves trapped in a closet while George A. Romero films his latest project at the location. Here, the events of Call the Dead occur as Samantha, in her pursuit of Ultimus, unleashes an undead outbreak. The movie stars fight the undead horde, ultimately recovering the Vril device for Richtofen. Ultimus teleports back in time to 1956 Shangri-La in an effort to acquire the next artifact required to defeat Samantha, the Focusing Stone. On April 25, 1956, two explorers named Brock and Gary travel to Shangri-La in search of Agartha. During an eclipse, they're unwittingly trapped in a time loop, dying over and over. As Ultimus arrives in 1956, the events of Shangri-La occur. With the help of Brock and Gary, Ultimus acquires the Focusing Stone. They then travel to October 13, 2025, 80 years after the commencement of Operation SHIELD, where the events of Moon take place. Using the Vril device and the Focusing Stone, Richtofen completes his grand scheme and swaps bodies with Samantha on the Moon, giving him full control of the zombies and the ether. Maxis contacts the remaining members of Ultimus through the station's electronics and asks for their help to defeat Richtofen. They agree. Ultimus launches missiles at Earth, leaving it fractured and broken. They sever Richtofen's connection with the ether, but he maintains control over the zombies. Meanwhile, on Earth, a nuclear bomb explodes outside of Nuketown as a result of Broken Arrow's drilling. CIA and CDC operatives arrive to find an undead outbreak already in progress. The events of Nuketown then occur. One of the missiles from the moon hits Nuketown, killing all on sight, except for Marlton Johnson, who survives by hiding in a nuclear bunker. Shortly afterwards, the main Broken Arrow facility burns down in a fire and the group is disbanded. Russman, his mind broken after more than 40 years of exposure to Element 115, begins to walk the Earth. The zombie outbreak begins to spread worldwide. In 2027, a society of survivors who eat the undead is formed. They are the Flesh. Among their members is Samuel Stuhlinger. Through the consumption of the undead meat, the Flesh begin hearing Richtofen's voice. He tries to persuade them to build global polarization devices for him in pursuit of his new plan, to mend the rift in space-time and acquire full control over the ether. At the same time, Maxis begins communicating with survivors on Earth through electronics, telling those willing to listen to build global polarization devices for him in pursuit of his new plan, to open Agartha and reunite him with Samantha, even though it will result in the destruction of the Earth. In 2029, the Flesh and Maxis' followers meet in Hanford, Washington. As they begin to fight, a zombie horde moves in and destroys all who remain. Stuhlinger is one of the few to escape. Richthofen and Maxis are left with no one to communicate with near Green Run, where the first polarization device must be constructed. On the 10-year anniversary of the events of Moon, Stuhlinger meets Russman, who has stolen a bus from an abandoned Broken Arrow facility. 8 days later, on October 21st, 2035, the events of Transit occur. Stuhlinger and Russman run into Marlton and Abigail Misty Briarton at a diner near the Hanford site facility. The four would become known as Victus. Maxis asks them to complete the polarization device in his favor. Stuhlinger, having consumed the zombie meat, is contacted by Richthofen, who orders Stuhlinger to construct the device for him instead. Victus constructs the device for Maxis. Still hoping to regain control, Richthofen teleports Victus to Province 22, China, where he demands that Stuhlinger activate the second polarization device. Here, the events of Die Rise occur. Once again, the crew sides with Maxis. The voices cease for some time, leaving Victus to wander the Earth. On December 31st, 2035, the events of Buried occur. Victus arrives at an old western town now located beneath a mining facility in Angola due to temporal rifts caused by the fracturing of Earth in 2025. Victus activates the final polarization device in Maxis' favor. Now corrupted by the Dark Ether, he reveals his true intentions to Victus and punishes Richthofen by trapping his soul in a zombie. Samantha is teleported from the moon in 2025 to Agartha by Maxis. In Agartha, she witnesses the evil that has corrupted her father. When a rift opens in Dimension 63 in 1918, she reaches out to that timeline's Maxis for help. In Dimension 63, Pablo's account of the Great War causes history to play out differently. Group 935 is founded decades earlier and isn't started by Maxis. Richthofen and Maxis meet at Heidelberg University in 1906. Having lost his parents, Richthofen comes to view Maxis as a father figure. In 1912, Richthofen and Maxis join Group 935. In 1917, Group 935 begins to use Pablo's journal to excavate the Great War tomb in northern France and experiment with Element 115. This involves the creation of giant robots and the construction of copies of elemental staves used by Primus in the Great War. The Samantha from the original dimension contacts Maxis, claiming to be his daughter even though Maxis has no children in Dimension 63. In late 1917 and early 1918, Nikolai Belinsky, Takio Masaki, and Tank Dempsey are sent by their respective governments to investigate the strange occurrences in northern France. As they arrive, Element 115 awakens the undead knights from the Great War and quickly consumes the camp. Maxis is rendered catatonic by the element, and Richthofen removes his brain before he turning him into the Maxis drone. On June 4th, 1918, the events of Origins occur. Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takio unite with Richthofen on the battlefield and help free Samantha from her imprisonment in Agartha. The four would later be known as Primus. Maxis' brain arrives in Agartha, and a mysterious figure known as Dr. Monty decides to step in. Dr. Monty is a godlike figure that's the head of the Keepers. His goal is to create a perfect world in Agartha free from corruption. He's the one who helps each set of characters in their fight against the zombies by giving them perk machines, weapons, gobblegum, and more. Monty brings Maxis' brain to his house in Agartha and wipes the version of Maxis from the original dimension that has been corrupted by the Dark Ether from existence. Monty creates a new body for the brain of Dimension 63 Maxis, but he isn't able to give Maxis a new soul. Monty then takes Samantha away from the house and rids her of corruption, restoring her innocence. Monty then explains to Maxis that the paradox wrought by a multiverse must be resolved. A new reality can be created, one free of the Apothegons, but only if they enlist the aid of souls who lived through and survived the fracturing. This is Monty's plan. After Origins, Primus is teleported to 1943 in the original dimension, where they formulate a plan to stop Ultimus Richthofen. Richthofen is contacted from the house by Maxis, who warns against allowing the Ultimus test subjects to be awakened. Richthofen is then teleported to the house in Agartha, where he's reunited with Maxis. Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takio travel to October 13th, 1945, Derice, via an unknown method. Maxis tells Richthofen that he needs to acquire the summoning key and another artifact called the Chronorium, a book of knowledge that shows the reader what information they need at that specific moment in time. Richthofen discovers that he's linked to Stuhlinger and then decides to use Victus to acquire the Chronorium. Richthofen then travels to 1940 in Dimension 63, where he contacts the Illuminati and Stanley Ferguson, a guard at Alcatraz, instructing them to build a lab beneath Alcatraz. Richthofen then returns to the house where he manipulates Stuhlinger in order to persuade Victus to acquire the Chronorium. Victus gives in and they travel to a dimension called Zero Base to recover the Chronorium. In Zero Base, they sequence blood samples that allow them to retrieve the Chronorium, as it can only be accessed by those who have a soul. During their quest to acquire the Chronorium, Victus is pursued by undead Richthofen and his army of zombies. Victus and Primus Richthofen both travel to July 4th, 1941 in the lab underneath Alcatraz in Dimension 63. Richthofen reads the Chronorium and discovers numerous timelines documenting his fate. He learns of various paradoxes that he must set in motion to complete the cycle. Richthofen enters a rift to travel to 1934 to acquire the blood of Sal DeLuca and Finn O'Leary. These two mobsters were prisoners at Alcatraz during the early 1930s. Along with Billy Handsome and Albert the Weasel Arlington, they all were serving time related to their criminal activity as a part of the DeLuca crime family, the crew that Sal runs. On April 1st, 1933, Al convinces Sal, Finn, and Billy that they can build a plane and escape Alcatraz. Al strings them along for 8 months until the mobsters have had enough. They plan to enact a bloody revenge. On New Year's Eve 1933, Finn, Sal, and Billy lure Al to the roof and kill him. Primus Richthofen collects the blood of Sal and Finn on January 11th, 1934. 8 days later, on January 19th, Sal, Finn, and Billy are found guilty of Al's murder and executed by the electric chair. They awaken in Purgatory alongside Al, where the events of Mob of the Dead take place. The Mob of the Dead crew battles waves of the undead as they find themselves trapped in a seemingly endless cycle. After securing the blood of Sal and Finn, Richthofen visits a younger version of himself in 1914. He hands himself some blood vials, explaining, "You will need this blood. When the time comes, it will protect you." Richthofen then travels to the original dimension in 2036, where he instructs undead Richthofen to pursue Victus while they acquire the Chronorium and recover their blood vials. Primus Richthofen then rendezvous with undead Richthofen after he has collected the blood vials of Victus from Zero Base, and Primus Richthofen collects them. Primus Richthofen then returns to July 4th, 1941 in the lab underneath Alcatraz and places Victus in stasis chambers to be kept safe until they are needed next. Shortly afterwards, Primus arrives from Zetsubou no Shima to collect the Victus blood samples from Richthofen. Following Primus's departure, Richthofen learns the location of the summoning key. Richthofen travels to Morgue City in 1944 of Dimension 63 to collect the summoning key. The summoning key is being kept by a reporter who Richthofen goes and meets. The reporter orders Richthofen to stay away before attacking him. Richthofen kills the reporter in self-defense. Meanwhile, the Shadow Man manipulates 4 residents of Morgue City into committing murders. They include a magician named Nero Blackstone, a crooked cop named Jackie Vincent, a boxer named Floyd Campbell, and an actress named Jessica Rose. Jessica murders a photographer who has incriminating photos of her. Jackie kills a snitch who could turn him in for being crooked. Floyd wears brass knuckles under his boxing gloves and kills his opponent for the prize money. Nero kills his wife for insurance money because he thinks she's in debt because of the Shadow Man's manipulations. On April 25th, 1944, the events of Shadows of Evil take place. Nero, Jack, Floyd, and Jessica are knocked unconscious at the Black Lace Burlesque Club. They wake up in a twisted version of Morgue City, shifted slightly from reality. Told they can atone for their sins by the Shadow Man, all 4 are tricked into performing rituals. Jessica sacrifices her producer, Jackie sacrifices his partner, Floyd sacrifices his promoter, and Nero sacrifices his lawyer. Completing the required rituals, the Apothicons are given access to Dimension 63. Realizing they've been duped, the 4 work with the Keepers to defeat the Shadow Man. They trap him in the summoning key, but before they can hand it over to the Keepers, Primus Richthofen arrives and steals the key. Richthofen travels to Dimension 2210 to secure an innocent Richthofen soul. He delivers the soul to the house where Monty gives Eddie a physical form to play with Samantha. From within the summoning key, the Shadow Man states, "I'll be seeing you." Richthofen's journey is then complete, so he travels to the original dimension's October 13th, 1945 to meet up with the rest of Primus. As a zombie outbreak occurs, Primus, Dempsey, Takio, and Nikolai confront Ultimus Richthofen moments after he teleports Maxis and Samantha. As they try to reason with him to wake their counterparts, Primus Richthofen arrives through the teleporter and kills his Ultimus self, triggering fractures across space and time. This causes the events of the Giant to occur. As Primus fights the undead, Group 935 secure the Dempsey test subject and transport him to Der Eisendrache. Primus pursues them in a German Giant. On November 5th, 1945, Der Eisendrache takes place. Recovering the Dempsey test subject from a rocket bound for the moon, Richthofen secures his soul and reveals to Primus his intention to set things right by securing the souls of Ultimus and sending them to the house. Each of the fractures is a slightly different version of events from the original dimension. Primus travels from Dreisendrache to Zetsubo no Shima, which takes place on October 18, 1945. In this fracture, the Rising Sun facility is overrun by zombies in 1942, changing the course of history. Instead, Division 9 relocates to an island facility, and instead of sending Takeo to Group 935, Division 9 directly experiments on Takeo after the Emperor betrays him. In Zetsubo no Shima, Primus secures Ultimus Takeo's soul after they free him from imprisonment and help him commit seppuku. Richthofen then takes the crew to the lab underneath Alcatraz to collect the blood of Victus for the insurance policy. They return to the island before traveling to their next destination. After Zetsubo no Shima, Primus travels to a fracture where Division 9 resurrects ancient dragons for the Eastern Front of World War II, and the Battle of Stalingrad never ends. On November 6, 1945, the events of Gorod Krovi take place. Here, they acquire the soul of Nikolai, who is one of the only Russian soldiers that remains on the battlefield. Richthofen teleports the souls of Dempsey, Takeo, and Nikolai to Maxis at the house. Monty turns each soul into an innocent child free of corruption to play with Eddie and Samantha in Agartha. Now soulless, Primus brings the summoning key to the house where Maxis unwittingly releases the Shadow Man from the summoning key. The Shadow Man in turn frees the Apothicons from the Dark Aether. During the final battle for Agartha, the events of Revelations take place. Unaware that they would be wiped from existence once they have served their purpose, Primus battles alongside Monty in his final battle against the Shadow Man, ultimately defeating the Apothicons and saving Agartha. Before the battle is over, Primus consumes the blood of the mobsters and Victus. With the Shadow Man and the Apothicons vanquished, Monty discovers that Primus has consumed the blood of souls from dimensions that no longer exist. The paradox must be resolved. Instead of wiping Primus from existence, Monty sends Primus back in time to the 1200s to fight in the Great War and save humanity. After the Great War is completed, Primus disappears from history. This completes the Primus cycle, the end. But that's not the end of the Aether storyline. Primus and Ultimus will return in Black Ops 4 Zombies as something causes the pages of the Chronorium to change when Primus travels to the lab under Alcatraz from Zetsubo no Shima. The Primus cycle has changed.